everybody. Welcome to Insight Radio. I am your host, Danielle Egnew, and you are a fly on the wall to everywhere. How are you? I hope everybody's hanging in there and doing okay. We've got all kinds of coronavirus numbers spiking over the holidays, and I hope wherever you are staying safe this season. It is not worth risking your life, gang. If we can just all pull together, we can get through this. So be smart, be safe, protect yourself, protect other people, and let's just do the best we can to get through into 2021. My God, have you ever wanted to see a year in the rearview mirror worse than you've wanted to see 2020 in the rearview mirror? I don't know about you, but I'm kind of all for that. I'm like, see you later, wouldn't want to be you later, bye. Bye 2020. However, we've learned some valuable lessons this year. We've learned about how polarization doesn't work. We've learned that we do much better coming together as a consciousness, as a race of individuals than being divided. We've learned a lot through this time frame. So this hasn't been wasted. You know, that's something to remember. This hasn't been wasted by any means whatsoever. We just literally have been learning a great deal about ourselves. So let's go into this next year with some hope. And let's learn things. Shall we learn things? I love learning things. And not only do I love learning things, I love learning things that maybe are a little on the weird side, because I think that there's actually no wrong in learning. I think everything we learn can be applied to something else in life. I believe this to be a true story. So today, I've been getting a lot of requests to talk a little more about the paranormal aspect of our reality. And for those of you that have followed my work over the last, really 15 years, you'll remember when I did more paranormal television and I did more ghost hunting, and that was kind of a thing, right? Back in the mid-2000s, to have the psychic on the set. And what is the psychic going to have to say about this particular haunting or whatever it is? So, I have done quite a bit of work in that area. And I don't cover paranormal stuff quite as much on this podcast. Not because I don't think it's important. I do think it's important. I just note that there are some podcasts out there that are dedicated solely to the covering of paranormal stuff. However, I do think that it's important to cover it once in a while because it's part of our physics universe. Ghosts are part of our physics. And I still do, some ghost hunting and whatnot. Mostly I do it for fun or for friends and family who have a pesky little house guest that they are having a difficult time getting to leave. However, today we're going to talk about haunted objects because I firmly believe that all energy and understanding how all energy transmits itself from one thing to another, I believe that this energy transmission is one of those little pieces of education that we can take into lots of different areas of our life, right? Because the first thing to understand about haunted objects is that, yes, there are haunted objects. That's actually a thing. Mr. Zaffis, if you watched, the Haunted America series, talked all about haunted objects and the okay, Ed and Lorraine Warren, they had an entire career on going in and removing weird leaky objects that leaked creepy haunted energy. And they kept them in their house, really in kind of a haunted objects quarantine. And then, of course, Mr. Zaffis came along and did the same thing and wanted to keep those haunted objects quarantined away from people. Because objects can hold mojo. They can hold energy. Now, how is this possible? All right. First and foremost, if we're going to talk haunted objects, as much as I just love to talk spooky things, it is really important to remember that a haunted object is created in part it's a symbiotic relationship between what the object is constructed out of and the energy of the individual that is wielding the object. So we find a lot of what people like to call haunted dolls, right? Haunted dolls, dun, 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 the premise upon which every single horror movie in 1980 was built upon, haunted dolls. We love our haunted dolls. If you look at old dolls, the old dolls were made of types of porcelain that had a whole bunch of crystalline content in them and also had iron bases that held up the the legs, the neck, the feet, the body. So you've got this doll that's made out of spiritually conductive or electromagnetically conductive materials in the first place. Crystalline content in the porcelain, iron content in the body, or lead-based paint. Let's not forget our lead-based paint on early dolls. Because don't you know that lead paint really stuck? It stuck, boy. Stuck to your cells too and gave you cancer, but we didn't figure that out till much later. So you've got lead, you've got iron, you've got crystalline content in making this doll. And a lot of the original dolls too were made with human hair. And you have to remember that human hair is a hard drive. It's a protein sequence. Our hair is protein. And it's made of DNA, of course, as everything is. Yet our hair, it literally holds the past in it. Which is why when you get a haircut, you feel so much better. You take all your hair off and you feel lighter, you feel more amazing. Those of us with long hair, we are carrying 10, 15, 20 years worth of energy and memories along with us. I've never felt so good in my life as in the 90s when I was in Pope Jane and big long hair and big hair was just way out and cute pixie short hair was in. And I went and got my hair hacked off because I was over it and it was time for something new in my 30s. And my God, I felt so light. I felt so amazing with that short haircut. I think about that all the time. I think, oh God, maybe I should whack all my hair off and get rid of all this hard drive, especially 2020. 2020 hair growth is going to have all this trauma in it on my head. So I'm going to have to work to cleanse that out of there. But anyway, I digress. So you can see that, say, a doll is made up of elements that are going to conduct and hold electromagnetic energy, DNA energy. It's going to hold energy anyway. Now, let's put that doll in the arms of, let's say, a child who is dying of a disease that was quite a mystery in the turn of the century. Cancer wasn't well known. Tuberculosis was consumption. They also called cancer consumption. They didn't know really what killed people. They just know people died of things. So you put the doll in the arms of this, child who's frightened, and you're imparting a lot of frightened energy into that object. All right? And a lot of times, too, if we really want to go full tilt horror movie meets actual history, when we're dealing with issues of sexual abuse back in the day, there were a lot of children, especially female children, who would be raped and abused and then given a doll afterwards. Here's your prize for keeping your mouth closed. So there's a lot of trauma that would go into that doll. And I found a lot of sexual abuse energy come off of toys from children, and I like to call it the hushed era. It's gross. It's ungodly. It's gross. So we wonder, how do objects become haunted? Well, that's how. It's how they're made. Sometimes too, when we look at objects that are removed out of churches, okay, we look at churches and especially chalices that people were taking any sort of communion from. Those chalices obviously are metal, and metal is an electromagnetic semiconductor. Most metals, you have to work really hard to get an alloy that will transmute no energy whatsoever. And honestly, most old world chalice cups weren't made of non-conductive energy. That's just not what they were made out of. So when you have these chalice cups and people going to church, I don't know about you, but growing up, when I was in church, people were crying in the pews. They looked like they ate their own crap sandwich. They were miserable. People were going to church to bring their woundedness to God, right? They weren't going to church because, yay, everything's great. Woo! People were going to church to put their God/Santa Claus letter into the hereafter for help. Dear God/Santa, please bring me $1 million. Dear God/Santa, please bring me healing. People were there because they were unhappy. And then you go up and, especially in a church like Catholicism or any other church that believes in confession of sins, and you're going in a penitent place to receive communion, and you're putting your lips on that cup, and this energy of despair is going into that cup because you're looking for redemption, you're going to get a haunted object. Okay, so this is very cause and effect. And one of the biggest myths about haunted objects is that they cannot be discharged of the haunted or negative charge or imprint or spirit that's with them. So let's talk about the different types of hauntings that can occur with a charged object. First and foremost, when we're talking a haunted object, we're talking something that has been charged with a spiritual emotionality, like a battery. And we don't understand as human beings how much energy our emotions convey. Our emotions convey tons and tons of energy all the time. It's a crazy thing. So the fact that we've got all of this energy that's flowing through us and all of this emotionality that can charge an object, first and foremost, be aware of that in your everyday life. Okay? Because this podcast is all about the learning. Learning. If we can charge objects, then we got to be careful of what we're charging in our everyday lives. I mean, have you ever heard of a haunted office chair? I have. As a matter of fact, when our Road Angel production team was out looking for some cool repurposed furniture that we could put in our production office, because all of us on the production team, myself, Mary, Melissa, we all are into old cool antiques and whatnot, right? And Mary was looking at a particular chair, and she asked me, "What do you think of this chair?" It was this mid-century modern thing, which is not my favorite time period anyway. However, oh my God, there had been a woman sitting in that chair for 30 years who hated her life, who was obese, who had health problems, who hated her marriage, who was mistreated everywhere. I mean, it was just the misery of that woman was so soaked into that chair, that office chair. I just looked at Mary. I'm like, I can't do the chair. And Mary's a doll. She's like, no worries. We don't do the chair. There's a million chairs. We don't need this chair. So pay attention to what energy you're putting into the world, because you can create a haunted object. I can create a haunted object. Say there's only a guitar that I ever play when I'm completely miserable. I actually give all my guitars a crack at my misery. But I mean, let's just pretend, right, that there's only one guitar that I pick up, and every time my heart is broken, I only play that one guitar, blah. And I never play it when I'm happy, but only when I'm miserable. Well, wood is porous, and wood does also hold moisture, and water takes energetic snapshots of emotional energy. So wood can store huge amounts of emotional energy. It's crazy. You wouldn't think so, but think of trees. Trees have their own vibe. I mean, I don't know if you know this or not, but trees actually have family groups. They communicate through phytonutrients in the soil, through their amazing root networks. They communicate with one another all the time. And when one is infected with beetles or something terrible is happening, it shoots out a chemical to let all of its family group know that it touches its little bitty roots with, hey, guess what? There's beetles. Emit a chemical to make sure that the beetles don't get on you because I'm dying. I mean, trees talk to one another. Trees have feelings. They have emotions. They communicate panic. They communicate support. They communicate love. They communicate all kinds of things through those phytonutrients. So when we are dealing with any wooden object, when that tree is getting sawed down, it is shooting as many phytonutrients into the soil of danger, 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 danger. Something's happening here to cut me off from my root system to all the other trees. So when we cut down a tree in one segment of the forest, we are traumatizing many other trees. That's just the reality of it. I mean, we can't take the life of anything in this incarnation and not have it affect other beings. That's just the way it is. Just because trees don't think and feel the way we do doesn't mean they don't think and feel, okay? So automatically, when we're receiving a piece of wood, we're getting a piece of wood whose last chemical imprint was holy crap, holy crap, holy crap, because we're cutting it down. The same with any animal that's slaughtered. I know humane farmers, organic farmers, that's safe for pigs. Pigs are eating, that will come up in back of the pig when the pig just has its head down to the trough and shoot it in the back of the head. So the pig doesn't see it coming. Other pigs don't see it happening, just pow, and that pig drops down and nobody knows what's going on. And the pig didn't even see it coming. So that's less trauma phytonutrients in the body, or nutrients, not phytonutrients. However, it's still gross. Don't get me wrong. Well, what we're talking about is wood here. And we're talking about the fact that every living thing emits a distress signal when it's being killed. So when we have a wooden object, it's got the natural tree freak out. But the tree freak out is going to be fairly low impact for high electromagnetically charged resonant beings like human beings. We have a very high charge in our body because of the electromagnetic organs that are dependent on that, our heart and our brain, compared to, say, a tree, because it's not driving any electromagnetic organs. So its charge is a little different. So people may or may not feel the trauma of the tree. They'll pick up a wood object and feel the freshness and feel the nature and feel all these things. Well, then you take that wood object and you put it in the hands of an electromagnetically charged being like a person. And then we put all of our distress into all of that conductive fibrous material that's made to transmit emotion and made to transmit chemicals and made to transmit messages. That's what wood is, okay? So we put all of that energy into the wood and we get a haunted object. One of the most profound stories I can tell you about a haunted wood object was my wife. When we were dating, she had this desk that belonged to a member of her family. And man, my God, you'd lay down to go to bed at night, and my arm that was facing, the desk was basically right up against the bed on my side. And it was just like a little desk you'd pull down a flap and you'd do little bills from the 1920s or 30s kind of thing. It was a small desk. And my entire shoulder would hurt every night. And I'd wake up and my arm would be numb. And I was thinking, what in the ever-loving hell is up with this desk? And in this particular place that my wife and her daughter lived, you would hear in the middle of the night somebody's footsteps coming up the hallway and coming into the room. Every dang night, almost. And I started to get wise about this. And I thought, I'm going to leave the door closed and see if whomever is out in the hall comes through the closed door and into the room. And sure as heck, it would happen. Walk, 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 and it would come. Well, finally one day, I decided to really figure out what was going on with my aching arm all the time. And in fairness, gang, I've played guitar for 25 years. I used to tour with a rock band. So obviously, I've got a little wear and tear on my right arm and my right shoulder as a guitar player. However, I thought this is just weird. So one day I decided to put my feelers out and figure out where this weird vibration was coming from. Because the home was a duplex that my wife and her daughter rented. The home was fairly new, and I really did not feel any haunting there was nothing in the space itself that would lend itself to a haunting, that I couldn't feel any trauma. It really honestly just felt like a pretty normal middle America 1950s neighborhood. There was nothing real remarkable about this particular duplex. It was cool, actually, really cute. So I thought, well, all right. I walk in, I figure out there's something going on with this desk. So I walk over and I grab the desk and I get this jolt up my arm and it hits me in the heart chakra. And it is just this solid wave of panic. It was horrible. And I let go of the desk and I'm like, oh, duh! I'm sleeping next to this crazy charged thing that is full of a bucket of woe and panic and despair and the anxiety. God, my shoulders just hurting even just reliving it here. It was nuts. So I find my wife, my girlfriend at the time, and I said, can I ask you a question about your desk? And she goes, oh, yeah, I was wondering if maybe it wasn't such a good idea to have that in the bedroom. Of course, I asked why. Why would you put it there? So my wife goes on to tell me that she had a family member who used to do the bills at that desk who was absolutely paralytically terrified of being broke because that family member, their family, was very, very wealthy and had lost all of their money in the stock market crash in the 20s and kind of got into this really histrionic freak out over money. So every dime that had to go out on a bill was this super traumatic experience. And this was a family member that had to sell their fur coats and had to liquidate everything they had in order to get through the stock market crash. So there was a lot of anxiety attached to this desk. And this desk was where all of the secret family money matters were kept, which apparently my wife let me know on that side of the family, there was a lot of hustle, bustle about money. We can't talk about it. Ooh, hush, hush, hush. So there was a lot of weird, dark secrets kept in that desk too. So I look at her and I said, any chance we can put this sucker in the garage because it's a massive buzzkill to sleep next to. And man, we walked that thing right out into the garage and stuck it out in the garage. And not one time did I hear a set of footsteps come up that particular hallway ever again. Because that object was anchoring to it such trauma. And it was phenomenal that it just radiated that trauma. So objects can literally capture, like a ghost trap on the old Ghostbusters. They can trap an energy signature and continue to radiate it if that signature is intense enough. So think about what kind of energy you're putting into your home, into your objects, into your car, into your chair, into your remotes on your television. Watch the energy you put into your electronics because those electronics will boost whatever energy you're putting into it. That's a true story. If you are placing electromagnetic energy into an electromagnetic transmissive object, you're going to get a transmitter for whatever you're feeling like. That's not metaphysics. That is electrical physics, okay? So let's make sure that if you're texting people, if you're putting something online, that you are doing so with love. Please, please. Nobody needs to know what we bitch about. Nobody cares. I tell you what, one thing after 2020, I don't know about you, I am so sick of everybody's holier-than-thou opinions. I'm sick of my holier-than-thou opinions. I am over it. I want to see something enlightened. I want to be challenged to be a better person. I am so over on social media looking at everybody's squabbles and everybody's reactive state in that moment about whatever it is. I mean, yes, we all get to point out whatever we want to point out in this world, but God, I've lost so much interest in social media. I'm barely on it unless I'm posting some message or some event or something. But literally, I've lost interest in the continual whining narrative of humanity. Have you? God, I have. So I think as we all kind of step away from that and start to bring beautiful content forward, that's going to change the resonant ethers of our internet, because we can create a haunted internet too, gang. We can create a spirit in that internet that is so heavy and so hateful and so awful that it just resonates every time we pick up our phone to look at Twitter or Facebook, or Instagram's not so bad because it's just pictures, mostly ads this time of year. But honestly, I mean, we create the energy in our universe, okay? This is an actual reality, folks. So let's be cognitive of that. Let's not be creating haunted, weird, faulty, freaky objects because we can't handle our impulse to not whine about some observation. And listen, I'm guilty of that sometimes. Sometimes I just hit a wall. I'm a human being too. And I get so sick and tired of the whining narrative. And so I turn into a whining narrative on Facebook or whatever. But I catch myself and, sometimes I take those posts down. Once I snap out of it, I'm like, oh God, sister, jeez. Come on. So haunted objects, how are they created? Well, absolutely. We covered the fact that they are created by imparting energetic intention and emotion into objects that are made to hold them. Okay? Another way that objects can be haunted, obviously, is we talked about through trauma, we talked about through repetitive use, but it's also important to recognize that there are different types of hauntings that can assign themselves to objects. Now, we have what's called an attachment, which means that there is some entity out there in the ether sphere that for some reason's really, really attached to that communion chalice or is very attached to that doll. And that being will then use that conductive element as somewhat of a third dimensional anchor to kind of hang around this portion of the neighborhood or this incarnation. Now, this isn't as common as our paranormal programming would have us think that it is. It is more common that haunted objects are simply replaying the feeling tone or broadcasting like a radio antenna on autopilot the predominant emotional, psychological, or spiritual imprint that was left upon them. That's really the most predominant of everything. What I would tell you, though, is that we do occasionally have haunted objects that will work as a tether to something, all right, or a tether to a spirit. So how does that work? How does that happen? I mean, if we're all powerful beings, and when we die, we'll say God is an all-powerful entity, and our angels are all-powerful, and when we die, our angels show up to take us over the finish line and take us off to the party barge in the sky to heaven so we can go to the all-you-can-eat margarita buffet. And I mean, how is it possible that a doll can tether us to the planet Earth? Well, first and foremost, understand that the doll is not the only thing keeping that spirit there, but this particular podcast is about haunted objects, so we're going to stay really specific to spirit attachments to objects. First and foremost, there's probably a lot of different things keeping that being there. Could be fear of crossing over, could be a love of the place they live, it could be an electromagnetic hiccup in the ley lines. But for the purposes of our discussion today, human spirits can use that thing as an anchor if there is fear of crossing over. It's the last thing that they clung to. It's something that reminded them of something that made sense or was a calm spot in their chaos at times. For instance, we'll go back to the footsteps in the hallway with the haunted desk in my wife's old duplex. Now, was that being sentient? Were those footsteps actually from an active ghost that was coming to visit its desk every single night? I don't believe that to be the case. I believe the footsteps were part of the energy of that desk. Now, what does that even mean? Follow me here. Say I'm walking with purpose and I'm barreling towards that desk. Boom, 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 boom. And I had to psych myself up to sit down at that desk, to open it up and deal with my financial horrors, to put the lid of the desk down and to deal with my financial secrets. And so there is intention before I ever hit that desk that is already fueled with fear. And it's really interesting because the footsteps that would come down that hallway and that would go into the bedroom, it was always kind of the same amount of them. And I can't remember the number now, but I remember counting them out one night and counting them out the second night and counting them out the third night. And they were like one off every single night. I mean, whatever it was, 30 footsteps, 31 footsteps, 30 footsteps. They were the exact same amount every night. Boom, 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 boom. And they'd stop. And that's when I realized that the impact and the sound was being projected into that desk because that intention towards that desk was being created 30 feet before that person ever hit that desk. So sometimes we can experience things that are auditory that, again, are like a hologram being projected off of the object. That does not mean that it has a spirit attachment. The spirit attachment issue that I'm talking about right now is different. Now, a spirit attachment with an object is going to be very, very obvious. Very, 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 very obvious. From the perspective that it's not just going to give you a sore arm or a sore shoulder. it's going to change the ethers in the room. Now, a haunted object that is projecting a particular emotional predisposition, it's projecting into the room also, right? So just like a radio in the corner, that music is going to color the room. However, that's different. The music coloring the flavor of the room, or an object radiating its emotions that have been, its creepy haunted emotions that have been implied into it over the years, that's different than an etheric change in the ethers when a spirit is present that's anchoring itself with the object. So what's the difference? Well, an etheric change. Have you ever walked in a room and it just feels freaking gross and heavy? You know what? I like to call it ghost gross. It just feels ghost gross. I mean, you walk in and it's this bleh, like the air is being sucked out of your lungs. Like there's this depressive whoa in the room. If you get that really, really, really severely, that's called demonic oppression, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're just talking about just a gilch in the room or just a sadness. A lot of times, spirit attachment to objects can feel very, very sad. Now, it's important to note here that sometimes spirit attachments to objects feel remarkably light, really light. And so you can have an object that makes you feel great also. I mean, I've found some antiques that make me so damn happy. It's because they were in a parlor with a happy family and a happy whatever, and those objects become charged with good energy as well. So we can charge objects with negative and positive energy. For the sake of our podcast, we're talking, spooky haunted objects, right? So why can you tell the difference when the ethers change? Well, you can tell the difference between a colored presence, like music in a room, and the etheric change because your heart chakra will feel it. All right? When I was laying next to that desk, I mean, my body felt a color in the ethers. Something felt weird. I felt a little anxious. When I touched it with my arm, there was an electrical charge that ran up my arm and hit me in the heart, and then conveyed all the information that had been left from the person who worked at that desk's heart. It was a transmission is what it was. But it was, again, like a radio transmission. The difference is, if I'm a ghost and I'm hanging on to my doll and I died when I was little and I'm still freaked out and I'm hanging on to my doll as my anchor point, then the ethers will feel heavy. It'll feel heavy to breathe. You'll get the creep outs. Like when you walk in a room and you feel like eyeballs are on you and you're not sure why. Or you look at the doll and you feel like that freaking thing is just staring at you. Come on, admit it. You have had that experience. We've all had that experience where you walk in and there's just something weird about that freaking doll. It looks like it's just looking right at you. Okay? That is the consciousness of the being that is attached to the doll. And the brain is matrixing, wow, there's a consciousness here. And that toy has eyeballs. So the brain matrixes that and says, that thing must be looking at me. That's easier to translate to the consciousness than, oh, wow, that thing is transmitting a consciousness that's looking at me from back over here in the corner, but the doll has eyeballs, so we're just going to say the doll's looking at me. You follow? So yes, there are objects that can be haunted and used as an anchor mechanism. When I've encountered those objects, I have literally worked to detach the spirit entity from the dependence upon that object, because usually that's something that flagged a sense of safety for them in some way. So really, if you're dealing with a spirit that's attached to an object in a negative way, there can be spirits attached to objects in a positive way, and you just feel this happy, jolly spirit in the house. And I always say happy ghosts are always welcome. Happy, jolly anything is always welcome. We're talking the creepers. We want to get rid of the creepers, right? So in that case, you really have to appeal to the spirit about why they're hanging on to that particular thing and what you can do to help them let go of the desperation or the anguish that they're associating with that thing. And that's literally just a decision on the part of the spirit. I love Hollywood, because Hollywood can take a true story and weird it out like nobody's business. And, there's a lot of narratives out there that, oh, so-and-so was bound by a curse to this evil lamp or something like that. Newsflash, that's not real, but wow, does it make a cool TV show, right? However, intention can bind us to anything. And I want to take this into our everyday life because we're all about the learning here. So let's take this to the everyday life. If intention binds us to objects in a negative way, watch the kind of intention that you're putting into objects. Watch it. What is an object that we often put a lot of anxiety into? Our computer. What's an object that we oftentimes have a lot of anxiety over? A dollar bill when we spend it. Money, frickin' paper money, coin money is so creepily haunted with people's anxiety. It's amazing. When I get cash, I will, before I deposit it in the bank, I will take it and I will stick it somewhere where I can put a little sage on it. I can put some rose petals and just let that money just deprogram itself because it generally has a lot of anxiety in it. People are counting and pinching those pennies. Pinching pennies? Think of the energy of pinching. And think of how society has exonerated and put on their shoulders people who pinch their pennies. I'm a penny pincher. I mean, you could be prudent with your money and not be a penny pincher. I pinch pennies. I mean, doesn't that just sound like somebody whose colon is contracting so hard that there's a black hole that just sucked the top of their head into? God, that's the energy all over our money. Let's all be prudent, let's be wise, but let's not pinch those pennies. There goes your head. So, if we are cognitive of the energies that we are placing into the universe on our everyday objects, then we become part of a solution rather than a problem of polluting our ether sphere with haunted crap. And there's a lot of crap out there. Oh my God, look at landfills. It's horrifying if we look at how much crap we buy and discard, especially in the United States. We're such a country built on creepy addiction in this country. Addiction to getting skinny, addiction to buying crap to feel better, addiction to sugar, addiction to sex, addiction to alcohol, addiction to drugs, anything to escape the hard work of truly growing within ourselves that we can buy with a dollar. So all those dollars spent in addiction, and it spells out a culture of anxiety. And then we dump all that crap in a landfill. Thank God Mother Earth is a giant electromagnet spinning in space that is made to disperse energies of all kinds. But still, man, why? Why do we got to be these people? Why? Why can we not consciously just put good vibes out there? Now listen. I'm not saying don't be human. We're all going to freak out on occasion. I'm simply saying be mindful about the energies that you're placing out into the ethers. And recognize that when we cross over, you don't want to use some weird anchor thing in your home as a touch piece to keep you hanging around a third dimensional environment. Cross over! Oh my God! Do you have any idea how fabulous heaven is? No, you don't. And it's a good thing we don't, because everybody would be pulling the ripcord and leaving these bodies behind and getting the hell on to the other side. It's a good thing we have love and consistency and a sense of being responsible to one another to keep us in this place, to keep us here. It's a good thing. We'd all be gone. Seriously. Oh, God. So we've got two kinds of haunted objects so far. We've got the kind of haunted objects where people use that object based on the physics of that object to anchor them here in this incarnation, and we can get people disassociated from those objects by speaking to those spirits and talking to them about the anxiety that connected them to that object in the first place, seeing if they're interested in crossing over. Remember, we do have free will after death, so a lot of times those spirits want to stick with their object. Whatevs. You can lead a horse to water, you can't make them walk through the pearly gates. So there's that. There are objects that are charged with emotions and with intention because of the base physics of what they are made out of. And they will sit in the corner and just color the energy of the room, like a radio spewing music into a room. But they're not changing the physical ether sphere or the spiritual physics of the etheric platform by having a spirit presence there. Okay? Then we've got a very small category of items, small category, where objects actually become the vessel through which disincarnate spirit life, either human or chaotic darkness, decides to take up residence. And that's actually a thing. And the Warrens have rescued some pretty gross dolls and kept them in cases with salt and holy water and sage and all kinds of things and other elements that diminish that chaotic spirit's effect on the third dimension. Because remember, when we're dealing with the third dimension or fourth or fifth or ninth or a millionth, we are always dealing with the physics in that dimension. So if we're going to talk metaphysics, we must talk physics because they are not, you can't separate those two. They're the same thing, really. So what we're dealing with on a quantum level, salt, right? Why does salt keep ghosts away? Well, it's not that it keeps them away as much as it makes it harder to pass. Salt changes the ion content in our atmosphere, which is why if you're sensitive to electromagnetic materials, it's a really good idea to have Himalayan salt lamps all over the house. It's a really good idea because, again, salt changes ionization. Ionization changes. Well, you've heard of negative ions and positive ions, right? And positive ions will build up in the atmosphere right before a storm. So I want you to think charged little ions up there going, woo, and they're sparking and they're ready to rock and roll and have their rock and roll party called a thunderstorm. And they're all ready to discharge. And as soon as those ions discharge, after the rain falls and after the thunder and lightning hits, oh, it's a lovely, mellow time to be an ion. And we are then the negative ions, dude. We've discharged all of our energy and we're negative of all that positive energy, which sounds totally opposite, right? Because positive should mean negative, but in the world of ions, dude, negative means chill. So there's all these ions chilling out after they dissipate their energy. Dude, it's good to feel peaceful after a thunderstorm, right? That's what I'm talking about. So when we are talking salt, all right, saline, dude, it helps with the negative ions, which means positive in the world of ions. It means chill. So salt helps with chilling the ions in a room, making them negative, dude, which is actually positive, right? Are you following? So what we're dealing with here is to create negative ions, it creates a discharged environment. Now, if I'm a ghost, I need a charged environment because I have to surf. Literally, I'm searching for charged particles on which to surf because follow this. Okay, here we go. If I'm a ghost, my spirit is made up in part of electromagnetic energy. Now, I no longer have a bag of salt water to ride around in, which amplifies my energy. That's a body. Because we're 68, 70% water if we're drinking our water. Without the bag of salt water to amplify the energy, I'm just floating around as random electromagnetic energy. So I'm going to do better in environments with charged particles, with positive ions ready to rock. Because those charged particles are going to be particles that I can hang on to and I can coalesce with and I can literally surf all around on those charged particles. I can use them as a temporary body and hang around. So what charges particles? Well, natural ley lines can charge particles. Computers barfing out electromagnetic waste into our ether sphere are charged particles. So if you have salt or Himalayan salt lamps, they go into the air and they make it negative, man. And they take those positive ions and make them negative, dude. So that those ghosts have a harder time hanging on to those charged particles to make basically a makeshift etheric body to ride around in. All right. This is why salt, people, the old world, they used to take salt and pour it along the doorways and outside of their house and whatever. The salt even would create a barrier of, negative ions, right? Even if that negative ion barrier was wafa thin, as Monty Python would say, it was still enough to interrupt spirit life. And you have to remember that when you're only 3 ounces of energy is partially made of electromagnetic content, that a wafa-thin interruption of negative ions, is enough to interrupt your flow, right? So are you really going to try to get through the curtain of negative ions, Or are you going to surf where there's more positive ions that you can use as fuel? That's a duh, right? Obviously, ghosts are going to go where they can find charged particles. This is why you find a lot of haunted power facilities. My God, some of the places that you'll find hauntings are power facilities because it's a lot of positive ions rather than negative ions that spirit life is taking advantage of. And if there's a negative thing that happened in that power plant and somebody died and it was traumatic, that traumatic hologram can play itself in the positive ions in the air that are made by the electromagnetic discharge. So there's a lot of physics to spirit life, and I get real excited about teaching on this because the more we learn about our natural environment, the more we cannot be freaked out about it, and the more we can identify things and say, oh, maybe I should just put a salt lamp in here and chill out stuff. Okay. If you have an area of your house that can suffer from a residual haunting of some kind, maybe you bought a piece of, an antique that you just love to death, but you hear footsteps since you bought the antique. That doesn't necessarily mean that you've got an actual spirit attachment. It could be a projection like the radio signal I was talking about earlier with the desk. Okay? However, put a Himalayan salt lamp next to that. I will guarantee you that those footsteps are going to diminish drastically, if not stop completely, because you're taking away the charge in the air that basically that frequency would broadcast on. All right? So, just making sure to cover before we're out of time in this podcast, the very rare event of any sort of object being actually possessed by a physical entity. Now, I will tell you that it's pretty rare for a human spirit to want to possess something like a hairbrush or a doll. And usually, if it's going to be something that chaotic darkness wants to possess, or a non-human entity or a demonic entity, a real low-grade... Listen, if you're going to have a demon possessing a doll, that's a really low-rent demon, all right? That's like a 17-year-old ne'er-do-well, just on the rap sheet, that one would be like the petty theft, the car theft, the petty burglary, the locked up for saying snotty comments in school demon. All right, we're not talking heavy duty, crack the earth in half and suck your soul to hell demon. We're just talking pain in the butt demon here. And it usually takes more than one if they actually are going to gang up or occupy some sort of usually it's something with the face, because it's no fun to occupy something if you can't scare people, right? So how does that happen? Well, you have to have a vessel, again, that is made out of materials that can conduct or protect spirit life in this third dimension. It's very important to remember that darkness operates at a lower frequency than even the third dimension, and this dimension we live in is super slow. It's really slow compared to everything else. Seriously, we're like taking a 45 and sticking it on a 33 speed. We are so slow in this dimension. So if you can imagine that chaotic darkness or demonic life even works at a slower frequency than we do, which is why demonic oppression sucks the air out of a room and feels so gross and weird, because vibrationally it's just not meant to be here. It's just all wrong. So if you've got a doll or an object, or sometimes mirrors can also hold spirit life because of the old mirrors, not new mirrors, because of the very, very thin silver filament that was on the back of the mirror itself. And the fact is, the silver used to reflect, obviously a looking glass, right? It would reflect an image. Well, silver is a conductive surface, which is why old mirrors, sometimes you'll see like black veins in back of the glass because the silver is beginning to oxidize and tarnish along those veins where the silver is retreating or the glass is cracking, and you get those black veins. So it's because of the silver content, again, a conductive surface, especially certain types of hardwood can hold spirit life more than other types can. So depending on the hardwood, like an oak or whatnot, and depending on the circumstances of the mirror, sometimes mirrors can hold some pretty weird stuff. However, for the sake of discussion, because this is a podcast about haunted, creepy things, we're going to say a doll. Because really, the biggest documented cases of clowns or dolls coming to life, wreaking havoc. Ooh, it just gives me goosebumps. It's so creepy. Have been something with the face on it. And Mr. Zaffis and the Warrens would find these objects, quarantine them, pour salt all over the place, put a blessing on them, surround them in holy water, lock them in a case, put a lock on it so that these things can't get out and are limited by the change of the ionosphere in that particular case that they're in. But in a very rare case, poop-starting dark entities will take up residence in something for the sole purpose of freaking people out, because dark entities eat fear. That's what they do. You want to get rid of something dark in your house, quit being afraid of it. Send it love. You don't have to fight it. Just send it all the love in the world, and it'll leave on its own, because dark entities can't be where love exists. It just can't happen. It can't happen. So, it's a very interesting deal. If you do have the super rare case of a possessed object, you can tell it's a possessed object because you'll shred it and throw it in the garbage, and then it ends up in one piece on your kitchen table later. That's a possessed object. And I have to tell you, gang, that's like 0.00001% of all objects have this much spirit life's interest infused into it to even do that. And we talk a lot about, Ouija boards that can be possessed and dolls that can be possessed. In that case, that's a different category of weirdness. That goes into literally infusing that object with so much love and putting it in a place where the object itself becomes a non-useful vessel for the beings that are trying to possess it. And again, that's why Mr. Zaffis and the Warrens would take these particular haunted objects and quarantine them with salt, with sage, with holy water, with actual physical elements that busted the groove and made it more difficult for the beings to possess those objects. So, I've known people to take objects that were actually haunted and just fill the objects with salt. And man, that really kills the buzz of trying to possess that, because it's difficult after that. So there are a few supernatural cases of super weird stuff coming to life and all that. And you can read about that online. However, I would tell you that they are very rare. And even those weirdo super slim cases can be managed by changing the ethers and the physics around the object or with the object itself. I've known people to shred like possessed objects and shred it and mix the shards in with a whole bunch of salt, and then they bury it. They throw it out into a river and they let the water, take it. And there's so much elemental distress and disturbance there that whatever the creeper was really can't put that object back together. They're fighting against too much physics in this third dimension at that point. And guess what? You lose. So, haunted objects, are they a thing? Absolutely. Are they rare? Truly haunted objects that are haunted by a physical entity are pretty rare. Possessed objects are beyond rare. That's like finding the 1942D Lincoln penny. I mean, it's beyond rare. Or 43 penny or whatever it is. What's important in this podcast is to recognize that any of us can create a haunted object. And any of us can pollute the ether sphere for generations to come. And again, I'm not suggesting that you don't have your sad times and you don't have your bad times or your hard times. Yet, really walk away from the impulse to bathe in misery in order to process what you're going through. I mean, you can bathe in misery for a snapshot, for a second, to connect with your emotions. I mean, like I say, we're human, okay? Nobody's perfect. Yet we've created cultures, martyr cultures, around bathing in misery. And this is just flat messed up, gang. All right? Those martyr cultures where we're bathing in misery, that is so twisted. Because not only is it weird, but we are also creating haunted environments by, well, being like a radio tower and just gushing out weird, gross feelings everywhere. And we want to think of people in the past. They made things haunted. We affect haunted environments every day. And we don't even think about it. We haunt the world with the bullcrap, the negative nastiness that we put on the internet that gets shot up into a freaking satellite and bounced around the world. And pretty soon, thanks to Mr. Elon Musk, we're going to have 41,000 satellites, I crap you not, blanketing the entire planet, delivering internet to everybody. I know I'm not looking forward to that. I specifically want to go places so I don't have any damn internet. It's ridiculous. But pretty soon we're going to have 41,000 satellites all the way up in space, thanks to Elon Musk. And we're going to have internet all over the world. So basically, we're going to be able to not only transmit all our good thoughts, but all of our creepy, gross thoughts all over the world. You know, I think that's one of the reasons that I see a massive coronal mass ejection coming that is so full of an electromagnetic charge that it just soaks all those thousands of satellites that are hanging in our world's atmosphere right now. It's so gross. You want to gross out and freak out? You want something to be paranoid about? If you're somebody who lives to be paranoid, look up how many satellites are beaming signals down onto the earth right now. And then look up how electromagnetic frequencies affect the human brain. If you really want to stew about something, don't stew about this election. Don't stew about political candidates. You know, if you really want something that'll scare you more than coronavirus, go check that out because that is nuts. Yet nature finds a way. To quote Jurassic Park, nature finds a way. And it's not natural that we're lighting up our atmosphere with this much weirdness. And nature has a way of just flattening the playing field and saying, okay, that's a fabulous little experiment with cray-cray humans. Here's a big coronal mass ejection, and we're just going to knock out all your electronics for a while. We're going to make you go back to looking at each other face to face and talk to each other like human beings. And you realize the same coronal mass ejection that would knock out our electronics would also knock the teeth out of haunted objects. Because we're talking the same type of electromagnetic infusion. So it's kind of like a big world cleansing, you know, when that happens. But we don't need to talk about that right now. Right now we've got haunted objects. Right now we're trying to deal with a pandemic, and that's a ways off anyway. So I'm just saying, if you like to really freak yourself out, since this is a spooky podcast, look into that. Look into that. All right, gang. So hopefully we learned a little about how not to create haunted objects, how to deal with an object that you may think is haunted. If you did buy an object that you absolutely love, that's got something weird on it, you know, go ahead and just sit it in a salt bed. If it's small, make a little bed of salt and sit it in a salt bed for a while. Or put a beautiful Himalayan lamp on it or right next to it. And over time, that's going to decharge that particular object. And it will make the negative ions happen, dude, so that object can really finally take a chill and let go of all the evil and rotten negative vibes. It's harshing, it's mellow. Negative ions are your friend, man. That's the only time negative anything is your friend. Negative ions are your friend. All right, everybody. This has been a ton of fun. I love talking spiritual physics. I actually love talking paranormal stuff because it's all about science. And I love that so much. So Just look into it. Look into it. Remember, man, it's good to make your environment negative sometimes in the ion kind of way. You go have a blessed and peaceful week, and I will see you next podcast.